In this presentation, I wanted to focus on the audiences that can be more difficult for us. It is perhaps quite easy for us to communicate to each other, talking now about censored and uncensored headcount ratios, about the dimensions and weights and indicators and robustness tests, because we all have a common set of definitions, of formula, and of understandings. But one audience that we are less accustomed perhaps to addressing are non-academics, non-statisticians, non-economists. And as we said at the beginning, part of the motivation of doing multidimensional poverty work is not that it remain in a national statistics report, but that it be used by people who are not experts, not like those of you in this room. And so this session is really to plant a seed, and it's a seed for how you will communicate your measures. Some of you are making national measures, so within a year, you will be in front of the press. You will be doing a launch event. You will be writing the infographics or checking the infographics some designer does to try to popularize your measure. Some of you are academics, and you might think this doesn't matter to me. But certainly in the UK, our assessments also reflect our impact on the world outside academia. So now in our university, researchers need training in communication. OFI people are trained in radio and television because researchers have to also be public intellectuals. That's one of the reasons that, for example, Amartya Sen's work has been so effective, is that he has addressed audiences by writing in the newspaper, by going on Nightline and other television programs, by making his work accessible to non-experts. So that's the focus of this class. And I'm going to talk at two levels. One is just a very general level about the principles of communication. And the second is some examples. So a little bit of background work. Before you came to the summer school, maybe some of you read one article or something on multidimensional poverty work. Similarly, before we start to write in the newspapers, it can be useful to read or search the newspaper stories on poverty, on measurement. Search the policy dialogues in different countries, in your country or in a particular topic, to see what similar social protection or child poverty or gender issues are being discussed. And then keep asking, who is my audience and why might they want to know what I know? Because it's a very difficult gap to bridge. And so we always have to be creative, and we have to take action. People are not going to come to us and say, please, could you tell me, Haile, about multidimensional poverty measurement? They're not going to do it. You have to go to them. You have to grab their attention and make them listen to you. So really thinking from the audience perspective, and then finding attention grabbers that I will call factoids, finding ways of communicating complex experiments, complex ideas in a simple way, and experimenting. A lot of things I've written have failed. We call them lead balloons. You hope that you will release a balloon and it will go up into the sky, and instead it tumbles to the ground. So you have to see, and the timing and chance also matter. So I want to start with the part of communication that is the most difficult to teach. I don't think I can teach it, but really, really necessary for communication of MPI in particular. And that is finding what we're going to call factoids. It's interesting, breathtaking, unexpected, surprise results that you use to try to show people the value added of your work. Why multidimensional poverty measure gives new information they can act on, why it's exciting. So, for example, some stories we have done have been to focus on the poorest billion people. Where in the world do they live? If we think of countries, they live in a certain number of countries. If we think of subnational regions, so it's 45 countries. If we think of subnational regions, it was 245. If we think of where the 1 billion poorest people by their deprivation score live, it was over 100 countries. So showing people the importance of thinking beyond national boundaries was one story. Another was comparisons. In the British media, where I was working in 2010, the focus was always on Africa. Poverty was an African phenomenon. South Asia was growing, it was light, it was, it had made it. And so the story that we carried in 2010 was we looked at the 8 poorest states of India, and we compared them with the 21 poorest, I think it was 21, countries in Africa. And we found out that there were more MPI poor people in those 8 states than in the 1 year is 21, 1 year is 26 poorest countries of Africa. And that really captured the press in India, but also internationally, because people were used to thinking of India as this resounding success story. Another story was how many people MPI poor people live in middle-income countries. A few years ago, Andy Sumner's paper had been very popular because he showed that most poor people, by the $1.25 a day measure, lived in middle-income countries. So we investigated and found actually it was the same. 72% of MPI poor people lived in middle-income countries. And then these contrasts are what you're focusing on. So Philippines and India, they both had about the same GDP per capita one year, but India had 54% of people in poverty, and Philippines had about 12. So very, very different levels of MPI with the same income per capita. So it's these contrasts that make people think GDP isn't enough. Focusing on the countries, what are the poorest countries, isn't enough, because the states of India have are bigger than some of the poorest countries. But our aim is to wake up that hippopotamus. And some of you sometimes after lunch, it's also to wake you up. So how do we do it? The India versus Africa example was complaining about countries. The Millennium Development Goal counted countries. If you look at MDG reports, it said how many countries are on track. But some countries have 300,000 people. Some countries have 1.2 billion people. And so counting countries is ethically wrong if you're interested in individual human lives. If you count the country of Maldives and the country of India equally, then the value of a person in India's life is 1/3,000th the value of a person in Maldives, because the population of India is 3,000 times larger than Maldives. So the India versus Africa was saying, let's not look at the rank of countries, let's look at people's lives. Now, how do you find these factoids? You've run your MPI. Friday, you'll present it. And you have all these results, all these numbers, right? And this is the art. There's no way to teach it. I hope everybody at OFI learns. I have no idea how you will. But it's just looking for interesting stories. Just becoming curious, asking questions, population weighting things, looking at regions visually, looking at contrasts, trying to find what's different, what's exciting, what's new, what's troubling, what makes you cry. I remember when Adriana and I first talked about destitution, we talked about it in theory, and then Adriana ran the numbers, and we saw how many people were destitute, had that definition of poverty, and it was so much higher than we had anticipated. So clearly when you come up with a factoid, we are scientists, you have to make sure it's right. Triple check your work, because your reputation is on the line if it is incorrect. But also try to find this interesting twist. So here's an example. Was presented in Pakistan at some point, and Pakistan at that point did not have an official poverty figure at all. And that year, Pakistan's poverty, the head count ratio and the intensity was less than that of India. Bangladesh's head count ratio was higher, the other big red dot. India's the big one. And Niger, our poorest country at that time, before we got data for South Sudan, is up there. So it seemed like there was no relationship because Niger had a higher headcount ratio and Niger had a higher intensity. So Pakistan was better. But then we zoom in. And in this case, we looked at the deprivation scores of poor people in Pakistan. We ranked everybody from the poorest to the least poor. And then we looked at Niger. Niger's intensity was 69%, and 13.4 million people were poor. So now go over to Pakistan, take everybody whose deprivation score is 70% or higher. Are you with me? Add the sampling weights. How many people, what number of people in Pakistan do you think it is? It was 15.5. It was more. And so if you thought of Niger, the intensity, the head count ratio of poverty in Niger, 15.5 million people had the same or higher intensity. And that'll be higher because Niger, the average was 69%. Pakistan, the minimum was 70%. So it was just to try to make an impression, to try to bring home the need to think about intensity of poverty and the number of people in Pakistan. We already showed you today, at the beginning of the course, one of the two new findings this year, which was the mapping, starting from an isolated country map with the subnational divisions, and then stepping back to see it in its context. The other story, I forgot to put the slide in, was about the regional runaways, the subnational regions in Africa that had made really incredible progress in reducing the MPI. And we're from Liberia, from DRC, from places that you don't often think of to be runaway successes. How could we learn from Zanzibar in Tanzania? How could we learn from northeastern Kenya? These were puzzles, and we still would like to work it out. So if some of you know, please tell us. But those were the examples this year of what we tried to do to capture interest. So that's a bit of research. And then the rest is just on communicating. So one is really to think with the help of a press officer, public relations person, communications officer, if you have one on your team, about your motivation for communicating. What are you trying to accomplish when you have your final report, when you have a launch event, when you publicize your article not only in an academic journal, but in a blog or in a feature story of your institution. So these slides are from the research communication team at OFI. And one is to avoid complexity and jargon. I think I mentioned earlier that Paddy, our communications director, doesn't really like the word stochastic dominance. And so he teases us and tells us really to avoid those kinds of words in communicating our work more broadly. To find simpler words, words that give people who don't know what stochastic dominance is, the intuition of what gets us excited, because he's not excited by it. And when you can't, when you have to use, for example, the horrible word multidimensional, 7 syllables, then really explain it thoroughly. Also, in terms of grabbing people who are not technical people, having a human interest story, a face, a life that they can understand, helps non-experts, your mother, your grandmother, to understand a little bit of what we are talking about. And the last is, of course, to try to see how it matters for policy. We gave you the example of Gasa in Bhutan, where MPI was very high, income poverty was 0. So the policy implications of that for Bhutan: build roads, build hospitals, build schools. So you have to start partly from your own curiosity, partly from thinking about your audience, but then also partly from thinking about what is the media or what are the communication channels that you will use for your results. So before you go to those, you want to know what your aim is. And this is the list, in a sense, that communications people regularly fill out. So you can take this slide and fill out for yourself or for your presentation on Friday. What is my goal? What do I want to communicate? What particular messages do I want people to remember? If they say, what did Jean say? Then they would be able to say, this is what he said. You know, so I went to his talk when he presented Senegal's labor measure. And then somebody asks me, well, what did he say? Then what is the message that you want me to tell my friend? And then who do you want to come to your talk? The media channels, the tools, the timing. And also realism. A lot of communication strategies are too ambitious and they don't happen. We're all busy and success is often also depending on what other news stories are big at the time. So we have to be realistic. This is also from our communications team. I changed the last word, I'm sorry. So they suggest that we really, just like we formulated the purpose for our MPI, we formulate the purpose for communicating. For example, we would like the MPI to be an SDG indicator. That's a purpose of a media campaign. Or in a country, in Costa Rica, we would like the MPI to improve our resource allocation. That's a purpose. You can cluster messages about that. You can think of how to frame it. But it's something that simple that you might have as your media or communications objective. And then the messages, I gave the example of what I should say about Jean's talk. But it's that. You will have to put in your briefing or in your notes things that you think people can remember and communicate to others. We are told by our advisors that researchers love to have these kinds of headlines. And that they don't work. So that the newspaper, the China Daily, will unlikely carry a story that academic gives lecture. It has to have the substance. It has to say, multidimensional poverty is wrong for China. It's too low. Or something, especially if it's controversial. They love controversy. And then after you think of your goal, your messages, then who do you want to listen to you? You may not need the general public. You may be focused on your bureau. You may be focused on the professors. You may be focused on policy makers, but not the general public. Or you may also want the general public, teenagers, high school students, university students. They're very different media depending on who your audience is. So for example, many people doing national MPIs do want their president to be present at the launch, as I showed you earlier. They'd like their president to know and take ownership of it. It may seem a very lofty ambition, but in a number of places that is a key audience. Clearly for national MPI ministers, not just one, but the array of ministers, and very important, their staffers, their technical advisors, policy advisors, the people who write their speeches. These are the people you need to get to. Also, every country will have a few experts that the media always go to. And they may be your fiercest opponent. They may condemn the work, or they may be a staunch ally. But given that the press will go to them, it's very important for you to involve them in the launch events. One country, for example, before the launch, 1 month before, invited all of the academics, including those very critical, to an informal exchange to present the measure and get their input. Others had actually one-on-one interactions. How you will do it will vary, but thinking about that is very useful. And then for the others, you need to specify because you cannot reach everyone. And the business sector, for example, are not going to read the same papers, the same outlets that international donors might read. I think this is obvious, but there are different outputs you could have. So this is a menu, too big, but you can think. Will I have a methodological document? Will I have an event? Is there just an ongoing communication channel that I want to put it up on? How will I tweet about it, use Facebook and websites? And who will I actually make a point to go and visit so that they understand? And when we think of media now, there are so many different kinds of media, from your broadsheets, the printed newspapers, to all of the different web fora and the specific user discussion lists, you know, the SDG discussions, the social protection network, the thematic networks of different academic groups. And so just again, when you're planning, you can't do it all, but making sure that you are intentional about which of these to try to address. Felipe can teach you to tweet, so I highly recommend that. How many of you have Facebook pages that you use professionally? A few of you. It is, I'm told, I don't have one, and I'm often criticized for that, but I'm told really having a professional Facebook page can be useful so that people know your work. And then once you've selected the audiences, then you also need to think not only about old and new media, but other things that you might do, like write a letter to the editor, take some interviews, issue a press release, and call journalists to follow it up, or make sure that they're interested, or involve certain high-profile experts to comment on your work. And then this is getting down to really basics, but it's quite important, which is use in English the simplest word, or in your language, simple words. Words that uneducated or less educated people will really feel comfortable with. That's the case even when you deal with highly educated policymakers, because the more complex words they may not understand in the same way. So it's very good, and I'll give you a rest by reading this poem. We begin with box, and the plural is boxes. This is really a mocking of the silliness of the English language. But the plural of ox is oxen, not oxes. One fowl is a goose, and two are called geese. Yet the plural of moose is never called meese. You may find a lone mouse or a house full of mice, but the plural of house is houses, not heis. The plural of man is always men, but the plural of pan is never pen. If I speak of a foot and you show me 2 feet, and I give you a book, would a pair be a beak? If one is a tooth and a whole set are teeth, why shouldn't 2 booths be called a beak? If the singular is this and the plural is these, should the plural of kiss be ever called keys? We speak of a brother and also brethren, but though we say mother, we never say meddling. Then the masculine pronouns are he, his, and him. But imagine the feminine, she, shiz, and shin. So English is really weird, and many people will do press work in English, but you have to bear in mind that the readers may not be as familiar with English. And so whatever language you work in, try to be simple. So I'm going to show you concretely some examples of these 3 strategies, whatever your media outlet, whatever your tactics are, that help to communicate some aspects of the MPI that we haven't yet covered in class. One is human interest stories. A second is taking wonderful terms like the joint distribution of deprivations and saying it in a picture. And the third is thinking, who are the thought leaders in your country, in your bureau, and how can they be engaged? So human interest stories, as I said, are much more accessible than graphs or numbers in many stories. If you read the literature on poverty that makes it into the media, most of it starts with a person, whether it's a disaster, whether it's a flood, whether it's a conflict, whether it's poverty. Often they will start, the rain was battering down on Mary's house, or something to bring you in. So in the MPI, we did that, for example, the first day by giving a human interest story, which was based on, in this case, Buba's fieldwork. But you might want to do something similar, to draw people in. So Rosaline, instead of giving the percentage, her sensor deprivation score, we start with her face. Of course, her sensor deprivation score is underneath it because we're OP. But, and then we tell a bit about her life, her family, her co-wives, her children. It took 7 hours to gather that bucket of peanuts, you know, how much it sells for. Give a little bit of context so people get drawn into her story. And then we start to talk about the MPI and what deprivation she faces and why she is poor. So doing that in your context can be one way of bridging the divide to people who really don't like numbers, are afraid of numbers. Many people are. And you need to, like a dog that's very afraid of you, you need to encourage them. And a human story is one way to tame them, to make them comfortable. A second to think about is how will you communicate the value added of the MPI. So a picture, they say, is worth 1,000 words. So, for example, our research communication officer a few years ago came up with the idea that the MPI is a high resolution camera lens, you know, so you can see at a big distance. So you can start with a wide angle picture and see a lot of things, but then you can go in subnationally by dimension, by indicator, by ethnic group, age, whatever, and see more and more details. So you can zoom in. So the metaphor of a zoom lens, camera lens, can be useful in communicating the fact that the MPI can be disaggregated and go down, in a sense, to the individual level. Another value of the MPI is that income poverty measures, for example, identify who's poor. But the only way that they're poor is monetary, that we know. And MPI then also shows the composition. So both income and MPI tell us who is poor, but MPI also tells us how they are poor. And so this is pictures of housing, water, voice, education, sanitation, cooking fuel. There's some pictures of different things, but done in a way perhaps that could be more accessible. And then our research officer, Gaston Jalonetsky, said one day he was folding his laundry and he thought of the MPI, as OFI people do when they're folding their laundry. And he said, you know, MPI it's like laundry. You can fold it and unfold it in many ways. So rather than putting a picture of a shirt, we put an origami dragon. So the MPI can be folded up into an MPI, unfolded into H and A, unfolded into the censored head count ratios with their weights, unfolded by different population groups. So that's another metaphor that can help non-experts understand decompositions. Are you getting the idea? It would be lovely if on Friday you give us more metaphors so we can use them, because we need some new metaphors. Another tactic is to try to get respected people give you their opinions. So this year, for example, our focus was on MPI in Africa, and we wanted to know what different people thought of the MPI. So, for example, Madame Albina Chua in Tanzania, she looked at her results. Tanzania, I mentioned, had Zanzibar, which had done very well in terms of regional runaways. Tanzania is also building an MPI. So she sent in her quotes. She was happy that they recognized the extraordinary rate of progress in Zanzibar, and that Tanzania as a country had very strong progress after Rwanda and Ghana and some of the leaders. And that they're also looking at new indicators. Charles Lefumfa is the Director of Statistics of the Africa Development Bank. And so he took a step back and looked at the Africa report. We sent him the draft. And he liked the prominence that MPI gave to interlinked aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. So he used the SDG phrase, tackling poverty in its many dimensions. And in a sense, giving a positive message instead of a negative message about Africa's progress was valued. Ayo is the chief economist for UNDP Regional Bureau of Africa, and similarly looked at our results, and what struck him was that map of Africa with 479 subnational regions. But what the implication of these quotes are, here's the chief economist of the Islamic Development Bank looking at environment and poverty in this Sahelian region, looking at the negative message that population growth is wiping out gains in poverty reduction. And then our favorite, Bali Lahola from Stats South Africa, also sent in a quote that in relative terms, South Africa reduced the global MPI the fastest of any African country, and also sharing their ongoing community survey work. So the effect of having these people is that if I'm watching a presentation and I'm not sure what to think, but I know one of these people or I know their institutions, then seeing their reaction gives me a little bit more comfort to take them seriously. They may not have known Buba, they may not have known us, but if they knew these others, then in a sense they can go ask them, they can find out more. So again, in your country, it can be useful to seek other people's opinions before the launch event and ask what they are happy to be quoted as. And all of these quotations are authorized by the speakers. So that's it in terms of a few ideas for your communications presentations on Friday, and also in real life when you communicate, not if, but when you communicate your results. But I wanted to mention that if you go back to the opening of the course, when Gisela and Yang Yang presented the MPI, you had a lot of questions. Why didn't you use my favorite indicator? Why did you use these weights? Next time, you are going to be answering those questions, and they always come up. No country has launched a national MPI without having to answer those questions. So prepare for them. Prepare for what you're going to say. Are you going to talk about participatory techniques, expert opinions, survey data, subjective measures, other methods of investigation, your national plan, your constitution, a prominent conceptual framework that you have in your country? Think about what it will be. Accurate poverty targeting, perhaps. So putting this all together, it's a lot of information. But very simply, if you have checklists of the questions that are in this PowerPoint and you answer them, that becomes your communication strategy. Even if you don't answer all of them, just thinking it through, you'll know which are the most important. That helps you perhaps to be concrete and maybe remember some things you would have forgotten. But also make sure your boss supports you so that they are on board, because if you are representing the national statistician, then the press will call her and they'll want her input. So make sure that she is fully briefed on the communication plans, no surprises. And it is a good idea, perhaps, to seek training. It's horribly embarrassing. I remember the first time I was trained. You know, you're videoed and you make the most horrible mistakes. And everybody hates their voice and their look on camera. Oh my gosh, it's embarrassing. And then you're criticized in front of your peers. So it's very difficult, but it's important, because then you really remember and think about how to present yourself actively. And the more that you can do this, the more, in a sense, that the word and messages and work on poverty can go out and serve poor people. So in a sense, it's an investment not only in your personal skills, and you might feel shy or that you're not good at it, but it's not about you. It's about trying to get work on poverty out effectively so that many other people can join the work of fighting poverty. If possible, it's also nice to get to know journalists. I'm not very good at it. By chance, I've gotten to know a couple, not very many, but then I can email them and say, look, this is coming out, it might be interesting to you. And I've done that, and they've featured it. And similarly, other people in OFI have done that with people that interviewed them in the past. Now I'm going to give you John Hammack's comments that he said you had to know. So first of all, he loves to give the example of an elevator pitch, that you should be able to say your goal and your key messages in 1 minute, in 3 minutes, in 8 minutes. You should have different lengths, so that if you're talking with the president, it's 1 minute. If you're talking on a news shot, you ask them how much time you have. And the radio, it might be 1 minute or 5 minutes. The TV, 3 minutes, maybe 15. So find out how much time you have. But you need to learn to package and simplify messages to a very strict timeline. And to be honest, it means practicing before with your phone timer to make sure that you're in time. And even I still do that. The other thing John would say, particularly to men, but to all of us, is that if the television calls you, please come on our program, then you're going to put on your white shirt. But white is the wrong color for television. So he wanted me to make sure that all of you know, don't go to the TV studio with a white shirt. Wear some color. And the other thing you get sensitized to if you have media training is how you use your hands. And your particular phrases that you always say. And if you always say or if or whatever your habits of speech are. But if you have the courage to ask even your colleagues to help you, then you can improve some of these a little bit. And I'm still learning. And then he would tell you to relax. I don't know how you relax, but just focus on the message and not on anything else. And he also wanted to stress credibility, that it actually is very detrimental if you are on camera, on radio. They ask you a question, you don't know the answer, and you say something silly. You will regret it. And so it's better to say, I don't know, or answer another question they wish they had asked you. You wish that they had asked you. But don't give a wrong answer or a possibly right answer to a question that you don't know. Be upfront and say you don't know. And also, if you can, find a local issue interest. And so he gives lots of examples. He was president of Oxfam America. I can't remember his examples. But if you can, read what's in the paper, what everybody's talking about, and try to tie your comments to it if they are relevant and not if they're not. So I'm going to whiz through this, but these are going to be in the slides. He also said if you are actually giving a longer presentation to a non-technical audience about the methodology, that he finds slides like these to be useful. And I think, Adriana, you've used this, and I know Buba's used it, in presenting to policymakers. Instead of people, they have names. Instead of zeros and ones that are numbers, so terrifying, D means deprived and ND means non-deprived. And then everybody can understand the same matrix that we started with. And you can walk through each of the aspects of the methodology with people and with only a minimum number of colors or numbers. And so these are slides that might be useful to you if you are explaining it in a simpler way. And this is pointing out your government intervention. You're the Minister of Health. You get rid of the health deprivation and poverty goes down. So trying to empower people to see that each policy intervention that goes down reduces MPI.